Hi viewers and welcome to the channel and welcome to another episode of the Lattice 2 workbench series for FreeCAD. In the previous part 1, we looked at getting into Lattice 2, how to install it and how to start using it with the polar array. We created a very simple cog in there using the sketch and repeating parts of the sketch. This video we're going to be carrying on with the polar array and looking how to use a compound of object, and that includes how to wrap text around an object. So we're going to be using this polar array to wrap text halfway around or the full way around that circle. This is important because in the very near future we're going to be creating a custom placement or a custom array of placements. This will allow us to follow a B-spline with objects or even wrap text around a B-spline path. So I hope you're enjoying this series. So let's have a look at this technique. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to the site. I also have a Ko-Fi or a coffee site that you can donate to if you so desire, and that's at ko-fi.com/MANG0. I also run a Patreon where you can subscribe and get extra content, and that's at www.patreon.com/MangoJellySolutions. Any money that's kindly donated will be used to expand the channel. Before we go any further, I wanted to show you the benefits of using something like the Lattice 2 workbench to work with placement and duplicating up objects or creating arrays of objects. Let's go into the sketcher, and let's say we were creating something along the XY plane that required a number of circles, like so. Now I'm running on quite a slow machine. If I use that circle and come over and use the create a rectangular array, let's do this 20 by 20. And you can see straight away it's slowing down. So that took a while to create that, and you can see I'm trying to zoom out and it's taking its time to zoom. It's quite processor intensive, especially when you're on a very old machine like I'm using. I'm using a Core i3. This is extremely old, hasn't got much memory. So sometime later we actually get our sketch on screen. So it's too processor intensive. Let's delete that. So now we've finally deleted our sketch. Let's create a new sketch, XY plane. This time I'm just going to add one. Place it in the center. And close that. Now I'm going to come over to Lattice. And I'm going to create a linear array. Come down to the number of elements. See at the moment that's 5. We need to come down to the count because that's read only. And set this to 20. Let's come down to step n, generator step n, and change the spacing. And I'm going to say around about 20 that way as well. So we've got our spacing set. Now I'm going to take the sketch, control click the linear array, and come down to the populate with copies or Lattice 2. Populate with copies and populate with copies. So we've got a sketch at each of those placements. Now what I'm going to do is add another placement, another linear array, and we're going to transform that and rotate it around this way. So we've got our linear array going this way. Steps, that's fine. So let's come up to the count and set that to 20. Span in, change this to step, and come down and set the steps to 20 as well. Now what we're going to do is take the linear array, the sketch, control click the linear array, come up to Lattice 2, populate with copies build array. See how much faster that was? Come in, see the linear array there, let's press the space bar and we can see the linear array and the sketch there. So now we've got this, and that was so much faster to actually create this sketch with all these. So just think if this was pads or pockets, we can do exactly the same thing. And we're just moving it like a normal object. No processor problems. I'm on an old machine, just so much easier to work with. So in the previous video, we looked at the Lattice 2 workbench, understood how to install it, and started to use the polar array. It started to learn how the placement works and the arrays work. We did that for single objects. So we used the polar array and we created a single object over in the part. We even used a sketch. So we were looking at creating cogs with the sketcher. So if you haven't looked at that video, please go and have a look at that now. That's a lot more in depth than what I'm just going to show you now. In the part, if we had circled here and we used that polar array with that sphere over in the Lattice workbench, and we'll control click both of those, the polar and the sphere, and use the populate with copies, and use the populate with copies. We'll come over to Lattice 2, populate with copies and populate with copies. Then that sphere is duplicated a number of times across there. But what happens if we don't want to use a sphere? Let's say we wanted to use a collection of objects like, say, text. So each of those text elements is an object that is a collection, also known as an array. Now you'll be using arrays a lot in the Lattice 2 workbench because it's basically about placement of arrays. And the placement itself is an array, and we can compound objects together to create an array. So text itself, if you had something like the word testing, that would be an array of characters. So testing, each of those will be a separate character in the array. Now arrays in FreeCAD are defined by something called a square bracket. So if you look across here, you'll see plenty of the square brackets. So you can see this paper plane or the kite is inside a square bracket. That denotes an array. These objects here, so this one isn't inside a square bracket where this one is. So this denotes an object that is an array, or a compound. A compound is an array. To create a compound, well, we need something to create a compound with. And this is what I'm going to show you now. So we're going to just delete what we have on screen. And let's get rid of the sphere and polar array as well. Come over to the part. I'm just going to run through each of these and add them to the screen. So the cube, the cylinder, the sphere, the cone, the torus, and the tube. Okay, that. And I'm just going to transform the cube. So I'm going to show you that placement of these doesn't matter. So we've got a number of objects that have just been placed on the screen. They're not one single object, they're all individual objects. You can do this with sketches as well, or any object in FreeCAD. I'm going to select all of these and I'm going to compound these together so they're an array. So I've just held down the shift and select the first one and the second one to highlight them all. Come to part, come down to compound and make compound. Now look at where it says make compound. Notice it's in the square brackets. So it's going to make an array of objects. Make compound. So this now is an array of objects. And if we drill in, we can see we've got the array there. Let's come over to the Lattice workbench now. So come over to the Lattice. We're going to be using the polar array again. We can use the linear array, the polar array, or even project an array, which we'll be going through at a later date, which is very handy to do. We can even join these arrays together. We'll be covering those in other tutorials. What I'm going to do is just transform this array over to the left hand side, just to show you that the placement doesn't really matter. Now, how do I place all of these across these individual points? Now, if you notice that the number of points that go around here, the number of placements, look at the polar array and come down. There's 7 where there was 6 in here. That doesn't matter. Let's control click the compound, control click the polar array. We're going to be using this one this time because it's inside the square bracket. So the blue square or the blue cube is inside a square bracket, the same as this compound over here. And it's showing that the placement is inside a square bracket as well. So we're going to be placing an array against a placement array. So make sure these two are selected, and we'll drop this down and go to populate with children. Brings up a warning regarding the amounts that there is, so 6 and 7, and you can continue that, that's no problems. And look what it's done, it's actually placed these across this placement. That's hide, so drill into this new object and hide the compound, and we can see what's going on in here. So each of these placements, an object's being added to there. I'm going to click on the polar array, come down to the amount or the count, which is here, the count, and we're going to reduce that to 6, and we'll go one more, 5, and you can see what's happening. So it's saying that the extra children will be dropped. There's a warning down here. So let's bring this back to 6. So we've got all of those across that array. Now this one looks like it isn't attached to anything, but it's actually the torus that's attached to that. We come into the torus and we can reduce the radius here to, say, let's reduce it to 5. You can see where that's being placed. So we've got all those items that have been placed across that polar array. If I click on the polar array, let's come into the polar array and change the radius to 20, that pushes that polar array out, and you can see how those have been placed. So there's an array of objects against a polar array of placements. Why is this important? Because when it comes to text, we have a nice little tool here that gives us strings at a given placement as an array, which we'll be using to place text in a circle. So to create an array of strings or an array of characters, we use this item here. We can actually use the other string options in FreeCAD, but this makes our life a little bit easier. So this is an array, you can see it's in square brackets. If we click on that, we can come down, we can change the size of the text, and you'll notice some text has been added to the screen, and it's laid on top of each other. So we click on the strings, you can see that in strings we've got string 1, string 2 in the square brackets. Click on the button on the end and we can add whatever we want in here. So I can add, say, some text like so, and you notice I've placed it on each of the lines, so we've got 10 parts to our array in here. Click off and they've all been placed on top of each other. Now if we extrude this, if we click on that, come over to the part workbench and extrude that and hit OK, that is still an array, and though it's not in square brackets, inside that is still an array. It's an array of extrusions, and though it only looks like a single extrude. If I click on that, come up to part compound, which is array tools, we've got make compound, explode compound, then in here we get a number of extrudes, the individual extrudes, which I can transform. So that proves that is still an array. I'm just going to Control Z that and go back around to the original extrude. So if I've got the original extrude, I can use that in the lattice. So this is still an array. If that's the case, then I can place a polar array, control click the extrude, control click the polar array, and then using these tools here, the move children rather than the move copies, also available from Lattice2, come down and we've got populate with children and populate with copies. Populate with children is the array ones, so you can see the square or the cube inside the array characters there, the square brackets. Populate with children. The move children is if we've got a placement in there, so we've got a placement attached to that. We'll go into that in a minute. Populate with children. It's going to pull up a warning because we haven't got enough placements. Hit continue, and it's placed as many as it can around that. And we can come into that polar array and set the element size, at the moment 7. Let's set the element size to 10. And you can see we've got all of those in there. Let's just hide that original extrude so it doesn't confuse us. And we'll come down to the extrude and the polar array. So come down to the polar array and come down and have a look at our arrangement. So we're going to be looking at the orientation mode. At the moment it's radial. It's pointing outwards. Let's change that to vortex. See how it's placed now? And we need to change the radius to make this a bit wider so we can see what's going on. Control R. And you can see how it's been placed. This may run the wrong way, so we can change the orientation. So come into the polar array, come down to polar array. We've got flip X, flip Z, and we've got reverse somewhere in here as well. There, reverse. So that's a true. And that's reversed our characters. So you can see it's got mango jelly around this way rather than the other way. So that's false, and that's going around this way now. We've got the flip X, so that's true. Now flip that around the other way, and we can use the reverse in that. So that's true. Now we've got it going around this way, and we've got the flip Z as well to flip that around. So now you see the black of the plane or the kite, and we have to flip it around this way to see the other side. So this is good if your letters are around the wrong way and you want to flip them. So this is all well and good, but let's say that we wanted these pointing, rather than pointing upwards, we wanted to point them this way. Well, this is where placement comes in. And to do that, I'm just going to delete the results. So we're back to the original extrude and the polar array. I'm going to add a placement in here. So if we look along the top, we've got this here, which adds a placement to whatever's been selected. We have to select the item first and come up to either the toolbar or Lattice 2 and come down to the attached placement and attach a placement. We decide where the placement's going to go. So if this is the case, what we've got to think about is the way these kites are in relation to each other. So if this kite, if I look at the top of the kite, was pointing this way, then this object will be placed around in the same orientation as this kite. So this will be hanging underneath here. Let me show you. If I hit OK, and this time we've got a placement, and we'll use first the extrude, control click the placement, so this order matters, then control click the polar array. So we're taking the object, its placement, and then we're going to say place its placement along the polar array. We come over to the same array methods, drop this down, and the last one is move children. This is also available on Lattice 2, and it's populate with children, not copies, and move children. Don't use the populate with children, use the move children. Now you can see what's happened. We've taken this object, these extrudes, and look how it's attached to the plane, and now that plane has been turned to attach to these, and you can see all of these are hanging underneath it. Again, we've got the flip X and flip Z, so come into the polar array and we can make use of this, or we can change our placement. Set flip Z to false, and that flips it up this way. And we've got flip X here, false, and now these are running the wrong way around. So we're just going to set that back. So you can see how useful these can be if we got to flip them around. Or we can alter the placement. So we've added that placement in there. If the placement isn't correct, we can go back into that placement and change where it's going to be positioned. Also remember, we've got the rotation here, so we can rotate the placement. So you can see it here, it's rotating around this x-axis, which will give us a different effect. So if I hit OK and hit Control R, these are now angled upwards. Because if we look at our kite and place the kite where these are placed, these are angled in the same manner. So this is great if we had, let's say something like, come over to the part, and I'm going to click on the bottom or the top and add something to here. So let's try a sketcher, and we'll add a sketch XY plane. Let's reverse the direction because we're on the bottom, and add our circle in here. We can connect all this up to basically like some kind of bangle or something, like so. Close that, go over to the part, do some extrusion. Let's go 10mm for now. So click on the extrude, forward, using the up arrow keys, hitting Control R, and just changing the size. So we're just going to move that inwards a bit, the lettering, and we'll use the extrusion and increase the size. So we've got those letters running around the outside there. Want to do, we can draft this or chamfer this. Let's add chamfer. And then we can join these together. So let's hide the original extrude. Don't need the placements or the polar array. Want these. So we've got two items in here. Control click both of those, and we can use the union, or we can click on the one we want to keep, which is the chamfer. Control click the one we want to remove, and use a cut. And there we have the text in here. Obviously we need to do some adjustment to this, and we could even just come in to the polar array and just change the polar array. So looking at, say, the radius, and we can increase the radius, Control R, or decrease it, and we have parametric capabilities on our object. Remember, we can go back to the font as well. So we come into the extrude, we've got these strings here. We can change the font, change the size. So for instance, let's get rid of that cut. So we see the original lettering. We can come into the extrude, click the strings, and let's change the size. So let's increase that by 20. Increase that to 20. And you can see we've just increased that, and it's still in the same position, all ready to go. So that gives you a little idea of how to create arrays and use those in your modeling. Remember that we're not subjected just to the polar array. We can use the span ends, which is 360. We can change this so it's, say it's like 200 or 300 in there. So we add a bit of space in there, and we've got all those around like so. So we've got space in here to allow us to place this against this ring, leaving a bit of space, or do half moons, etc. So we've got all that. We've also got an option to join arrays. So we could have a linear array and a polar array, or half a polar array, joined together. So in our next video, what should we do? I think we're going to be looking at basically joining placement arrays together. We've been through the circular array. We know how to create text around a circular array, so we're creating a circular path for our text. We can create linear paths Very easy, see the linear array placement there. You can join these together. Also, there's a way of creating a custom array that can follow B-spline paths. So we're going to be looking at those, wrapping text around those and objects around them. After that, we'll move on to something different that we can do with the Lattice workbench. So I hope you're enjoying all these. Hope you might find these useful. Very powerful workbench. I'll see you again soon. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to the site. I also have a Ko-Fi or a coffee site that you can donate to if you so desire. And that's at ko-fi.com/MANG0. I also run a Patreon where you can subscribe and get extra content. And that's at www.patreon.com/MangoJellySolutions. Any money that's kindly donated will be used to expand the channel. Thanks a lot for watching and subscribing, and I'll see you again soon.